Welcome to my channel. I'm Ben. Today, we step into the mysterious disappearance of a married couple from a quiet neighborhood in Windsor, Wisconsin, where the first clues led to a chilling discovery in the wilderness, sparking a chain of unanswered questions. From that moment, the peaceful portrait of an entire community began to change. The summer air in Windsor, Wisconsin was heavy with the scent of cut grass and the hum of cicadas. Inside a quiet suburban street, two cars sat in the driveway of a neatly kept home. To anyone passing by, it looked perfectly normal, orderly, serene. But behind those closed doors, something was terribly wrong. It began with unanswered calls. First from Christa's co-workers, she had never missed work without a word. Then from friends who noticed Bart's sudden silence. The Haldersons were the kind of couple who showed up for everything, reliable to a fault. For them to vanish without notice, it didn't fit. On the 7th of July, 2021, their 3-year-old son, Chandler, walked into the sheriff's office with a troubling story. His parents, he said, had left with another couple for a 4th of July weekend at the family cabin in northern Wisconsin and never returned. He spoke calmly, almost mechanically, explaining they had no cell service up there. At first, it sounded plausible until details began to fray. Neighbors recalled seeing both family cars still at the house. A friend of Christa's remembered she had a doctor's appointment she wouldn't have missed for anything. Then came the strangest site security camera footage of Chandler going door to door, asking if anyone had seen his parents, as though he were performing concern rather than feeling it. The tension broke 2 days later, when a search party combed through a rural property linked to Chandler's girlfriend. There, hidden in the brush, investigators found the partial remains of an adult male mutilated, concealed beneath sticks and leaves. The quiet neighborhood's illusion shattered. What began as a missing persons case had morphed into something far darker. And yet, at that moment, the most haunting question wasn't just who had done this, but why. Because the evidence would soon lead investigators back to the very person who had reported them missing, forcing them to consider the unthinkable. Could a son so outwardly devoted harbor the cold intent to destroy the very people who gave him life? To understand the tragedy that would unfold, you have to first step into the lives of Bart and Christa Halderson, and the son they trusted without question. Windsor, Wisconsin, is the kind of place where neighbors wave from driveways and kids grow up playing on the same quiet streets their parents did. Bart and Christa fit perfectly into that picture. Bart, 50, was a managing director for an international accounting firm. He was methodical, structured, a man who measured twice before making any cut both in woodworking, his hobby, and in life. Christa, 53, worked as a customer service representative at an auto body shop. She was the warm balance to Bart's precision, outgoing, nurturing, and endlessly patient. Together, they raised 2 sons, Mitchell, the eldest, and Chandler, the youngest. Family photos show smiling faces on camping trips, holiday dinners, and Sunday afternoons at the family's rustic cabin in northern Wisconsin. The boys were their pride, and by all accounts, Bart and Christa poured themselves into giving them stability, opportunity, and love. Mitchell followed a straightforward path: college, career, engagement. Chandler, at 23, still lived at home. He told friends he was pursuing an IT degree at Madison College, working a prestigious internship at an insurance company, and had even landed a job offer from SpaceX. To his parents, it seemed he was on the cusp of success. But behind the glossy facade was a dangerous fiction. Chandler had quietly dropped out of college. There was no internship, no job offer, and no bright future lined up. Every achievement he boasted about was a lie carefully constructed to keep his parents' pride intact and their questions at bay. Those lies began to crumble in late June 2021. Bart, ever the planner, started asking for official paperwork. He made calls to verify his son's enrollment and internship. What he learned was devastating. Chandler wasn't in the program he claimed, and his entire academic narrative was a fabrication. Christa, fiercely protective yet pragmatic, likely knew something was wrong but trusted Bart to handle it. Friends say she believed in giving her sons room to correct their mistakes. Yet she also valued honesty above all else. If the truth had come out fully, there would have been confrontation, disappointment, maybe even temporary anger, but also a path to redemption. It's in this space between exposure and confession that tension silently bloomed. Chandler faced not just embarrassment, but the collapse of an identity he'd been performing for years. His parents' image of him was built on the very lies now threatening to shatter. And so, in the week leading up to the 4th of July, the Halderson home became the stage for an unspoken standoff, one that neither Bart nor Christa could have imagined would end in violence. Because even in the safest neighborhoods, danger doesn't always come from strangers at the door. Sometimes, it's already sitting at the family table. Thursday, the 1st of July, 2021, began like any other summer day in Windsor. Bart was working from home, tapping away at his laptop in the basement office. Chandler, still wearing the neck brace he claimed was from a recent fall, moved between rooms upstairs. According to text records, Bart sent his son a short message just after 2 p.m. "I'm ready whenever you are." This, investigators believe, referred to their planned trip to Madison College to straighten out Chandler's enrollment mess. But that meeting never happened. What occurred in the Halderson home between that text and the hours that followed would become a matter of forensic reconstruction, because the only living person who knew was Chandler himself. By the time the evening fell, Bart was no longer alive. Prosecutors would later allege he had been shot twice in the back, likely from close range, using a semi-automatic rifle Chandler had received from a friend weeks earlier. Christa came home from work later that afternoon, unaware that her husband was already dead. At some point, perhaps confronted by the sight, perhaps ambushed outright, she too was killed. No one heard screams. No neighbor reported gunshots. But the walls of the Halderson home silently absorbed what happened next. Over the next 24 hours, Chandler began the grim work of dismemberment. A forensic search would later reveal traces of blood in multiple rooms, and more than 200 bone fragments in the fireplace, suggesting attempts to burn parts of the remains. Other body parts were transported elsewhere, hidden like pieces of a puzzle he never intended anyone to solve. On the 4th of July, Chandler visited a rural property connected to his girlfriend's family. Surveillance cameras and witness accounts place him there twice, once with her, and the next morning, alone. That second visit was crucial. His car was backed into a field, trunk facing the tree line. Minutes later, he emerged from the woods, wiping his hands. 2 days later, the performance began. Chandler knocked on neighbors' doors, asked politely if they had seen his parents, and suggested they were likely fine but just out of contact at the cabin. He delivered this routine even as he knew exactly where parts of their bodies lay. On the 7th of July, Chandler walked into the sheriff's office to file an official missing persons report. He described his parents leaving with another couple people whose names he didn't know for the cabin in Langlade County. He mentioned poor cell service, making their silence seem plausible. It might have worked had the scene at home matched his words. But both family cars were in the driveway. Christa had a long-standing medical appointment she had missed without explanation. And the cabin, when relatives drove 3 hours to check, showed no signs of recent use. No footprints, no fresh groceries, not even a disturbed speck of dust. The case shifted on the 8th of July. Acting on a tip, deputies searched the rural property Chandler had visited alone. In the tall grass near a tree line, concealed under sticks and leaves, they found a human torso. The remains were too damaged for immediate identification, but the location, the condition, and the timing pointed to one grim possibility. As news spread, Windsor's calm exterior fractured. A missing persons case was now a probable double homicide. And although only one set of remains had been found, the second absence, Christa's absence, cast an even deeper shadow. For detectives, the trail was narrowing. Chandler's story had cracks. His movements didn't match his alibi, and the physical evidence was beginning to speak in ways he could not silence. The next breakthrough would leave no doubt as to where the investigation was heading. From the moment the torso was recovered, investigators treated Chandler Halderson not as a worried son, but as their prime suspect. The transition was quiet, deliberate. Detectives knew that if they moved too soon without a full evidentiary net, the case could collapse. The first step was to lock down his movements. Deputies canvassed the neighborhood, pulling security footage from every available doorbell camera. They traced Chandler's path on the 4th of July and 5th, watching his car appear and disappear in predictable windows. At the same time, they reached out to his girlfriend, Catherine Melander. She had nothing to hide and everything to share. Kat revealed she tracked Chandler's location through Snapchat, a feature they'd agreed on after past trust issues. The data was a goldmine. On the morning of the 5th of July, Chandler's location pinged for roughly 45 minutes along the Wisconsin River, near a remote, wooded access point. When search teams swept that area, they found 2 severed human legs, cut into sections. DNA confirmed they belonged to Christa Halderson. Back at the house, a forensic team began an exhaustive search. Luminol lit up streaks and splatters invisible to the naked eye. In the fireplace, they sifted through charred debris and identified over 200 human bone fragments, many showing signs of burning at high heat. On the basement floor, a single spent shell casing matched the caliber of a rifle Chandler had received as a gift from an online gaming friend just weeks earlier. That friend confirmed he'd handed over the gun and nearly 500 rounds of ammunition in June 2021. The digital trail was equally damning. Investigators uncovered emails between Madison College staff and Chandler's father, messages that appeared official, but were traced back to burner accounts Chandler himself had created. The so-called internship and job offer from SpaceX were nothing more than fabrications. Bart had been preparing to confront his son the very day he was killed. On the 8th of July, Chandler was brought in for what began as a missing persons interview. Midway through, deputies at the rural property called in their discovery. The tone in the interrogation room shifted instantly. Detectives told Chandler they knew he wasn't telling the truth and gave him a chance to explain. He asked for a lawyer instead. That request didn't slow the case. On the 9th of July, Chandler was arrested not yet for murder, but for providing false information in a missing persons investigation. Behind the scenes, prosecutors and detectives were assembling the homicide charges. By the 15th of July, after forensic confirmation of Bart's identity and the recovery of Christa's remains, Chandler was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, along with charges for mutilating and hiding both bodies. In Wisconsin, such charges carry a maximum of life in prison without parole. The state signaled early that it intended to pursue the maximum. The brutality of the crimes, the calculated deception, and the fact that the victims were his own parents left little room for leniency. For the Halderson family and the Windsor community, the arrest was both a relief and a fresh wound. The polite young man they'd known had not only lied, but, according to the state's case, had engineered a plan to erase the 2 people who had given him everything. The trial ahead promised to lay bare just how far those lies went and why the truth, for Chandler, had become more dangerous than murder. The trial of Chandler Halderson opened in January 2022 at the Dane County Courthouse. Snow drifted outside, but inside the courtroom, the air was taut, electric. Seated at the defense table, Chandler wore a suit and mask, his once boyish face unreadable. Prosecutors wasted no time painting the portrait they intended the jury to see: a son who murdered to protect an elaborate web of lies. Assistant District Attorney William Brown stood before the jurors and outlined the evidence: bone fragments in the fireplace, shell casings in the basement, and a digital trail of deceit. You cannot shoot someone in the back, chop them up, scatter their remains, and call it anything but first-degree intentional homicide, he told them. The prosecution's case moved methodically. Jurors heard from forensic experts who described the painstaking recovery of remains and the matching of DNA to Bart and Christa. A firearms analyst connected the shell casing to the semi-automatic rifle Chandler had received weeks before the murders. Digital forensic specialists walked the jury through the fake email accounts, the fabricated internship, and the non-existent SpaceX job offer. The most dramatic moments came when Chandler's girlfriend, Kat Melander, took the stand. She recounted their relationship, her use of Snapchat to track his location, and the unsettling discovery of his movements on the 5th of July near the Wisconsin River. She told the jury about delivering cleaning supplies to his home, at his request hydrogen peroxide, and a Swiffer mop after he claimed to have broken glass from the fireplace. The defense, led by attorney Catherine Dorrell, took a different tack. They acknowledged Chandler's lies about school, about work, but argued that deception did not equal murder. They stressed the lack of direct eyewitness testimony and suggested there were unanswered questions about what truly happened in the Halderson home. "You will all have 12 different theories," Dorrell told the jury, "and that is a problem." Yet cross-examination did little to shake the prosecution's narrative. Witness after witness reinforced the same timeline, the same incriminating movements, the same physical evidence. Perhaps most damaging to the defense was Chandler's own decision not to testify, a choice that left the state's case largely unchallenged. In closing arguments, prosecutors tied every thread together. The looming confrontation over Chandler's lies, the timing of his parents' disappearance, the forensic evidence from multiple locations, and his behavior in the days after. The picture they drew was of a young man cornered by the truth, who chose violence over exposure. The jury deliberated for just over 2 hours, a strikingly short time for a double homicide case. When they returned, the courtroom fell into a hush. One by one, the clerk read the verdicts. Guilty of first-degree intentional homicide for Bart Halderson. Guilty for Christa Halderson. Guilty of mutilating a corpse. Guilty of hiding a corpse. Guilty on all 8 counts. Chandler stared ahead, expressionless, as the words sealed his fate. Around the room, family members of Bart and Christa wept quietly, some in grief, others in relief. The trial had ended, but for them, the sentence was a lifetime without the 2 people they had loved most. To the prosecution, Chandler Halderson was not just a murderer. He was a calculated deceiver who built his entire identity on a foundation of lies. Understanding his actions means looking at both the psychology behind his choices and the legal weight of the evidence. From a psychological perspective, Chandler's lies were not impulsive fabrications. They were sustained, layered deceptions that spanned months, even years. He created entire persona: students, internship supervisors, corporate recruiters, all fictional, all serving to reinforce the image of a son on the verge of success. This pattern suggests not only a capacity for manipulation, but also an ability to maintain parallel realities without losing his composure. Why kill? The state argued it was a choice made under pressure. Bart was closing in on the truth about Chandler's education and career. Exposure would mean not just shame, but the collapse of his constructed world, along with the financial and emotional support his parents provided. In Chandler's mind, eliminating the source of the confrontation may have seemed like the only way to preserve control, even if only temporarily. Legally, the case against him was strong because it combined multiple categories of evidence: forensic science, digital records, witness testimony, and behavioral patterns. The bone fragments in the fireplace linked directly to the Halderson home. The shell casing matched a weapon Chandler had access to. The Snapchat location data placed him at disposal sites, and his post-crime behavior, knocking on doors, filing a missing persons report, fit the profile of what investigators call staging, an attempt to divert suspicion. Defense attorneys tried to exploit the absence of eyewitnesses, suggesting that reasonable doubt could still exist. But in modern criminal law, especially in homicide cases, direct observation is rare. Courts rely on the convergence of circumstantial evidence. When multiple independent facts point to the same conclusion, they collectively form a compelling proof. Psychologically, Chandler's demeanor during the investigation and trial is telling. Witnesses described him as calm, even when confronted with damning evidence. Experts might interpret this as emotional detachment, a potential indicator of narcissistic or antisocial traits. His final statement at sentencing, seeking an attorney for appeal rather than expressing remorse, reinforced the perception that empathy was absent from his emotional framework. The case also highlights warning signs that often precede severe acts of violence within families. Chronic deception, isolation from peers, reliance on a narrow support network, and an unwillingness to face failure can form a dangerous mix. When the structure holding those lies together begins to collapse, the individual may lash out to prevent total exposure. In the end, the jury did not need to psychoanalyze Chandler to deliver their verdict. The law required only that they determine whether he had committed the acts with intent, and the evidence left them little room for doubt. But for those who study human behavior, the Halderson case stands as a chilling example of how the fear of truth can metastasize into something far deadlier than the lies themselves. When the final gavel fell, Chandler Halderson's fate was sealed. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. But for those left behind, the sentence brought no real closure, only the certainty that Bart and Christa were gone forever. In Windsor, the Halderson home stood as a painful reminder. The tidy lawn, the familiar cars, the quiet street, all of it felt unchanged on the surface, yet utterly hollow without the couple who had once filled it with warmth. Neighbors who had waved to Bart while he worked in the yard or shared coffee with Christa on the porch now avoided looking at the house. For the surviving son, Mitchell, the trial's end was just the beginning of a lifelong reckoning. He had lost both parents in one act, and his only brother to a prison cell. In court, he spoke of trying to carry on, to honor their memory, but admitted the weight of the crime would never lift. The case reverberated beyond the family. In Wisconsin and across the country, it stirred conversations about hidden crises within seemingly ordinary families, about how long-standing deception can corrode trust and how rare but devastating it is when that corrosion turns to violence. Law enforcement agencies cited it as a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing behavioral warning signs, even in those closest to us. Online, the story became a grim cautionary tale. True crime forums dissected every lie Chandler told, every decision that led to the murders. Some readers were struck by the calculated nature of his actions, others by the sheer banality of his motive, a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of his own dishonesty. In the legal world, the Halderson case was discussed in training sessions for its integration of digital forensics, how location data, fabricated emails, and social media footprints converged to form a decisive narrative in court. Prosecutors pointed to it as an example of how circumstantial evidence, when woven tightly, can be just as powerful as a direct eyewitness. Yet for those who knew Bart and Christa, the legacy they hoped to preserve was not the crime, but the lives they lived. Friends remembered Bart's dry humor and steady presence, Christa's boundless warmth and willingness to help anyone in need. Their absence was felt not only at family gatherings, but in the small, everyday moments that no verdict could restore. In the end, the tragedy of Bart and Christa Halderson serves as a somber testament that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is far less destructive than the lies meant to hide it, and that sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers, but from the silence within our own walls. The story of Bart and Christa Halderson is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from the outside, it's right inside our own homes. Lies, no matter how small, when nurtured and hidden, can turn into a ticking time bomb, destroying not only trust, but the very bonds that hold a family together. Instead of avoiding the truth, we should face it because the consequences of hiding it are often far more devastating than the initial painful reality. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think was the main reason Chandler went to such extremes? Was it fear of losing face? Or was there something deeper driving him? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your insight might help us better understand the criminal mind. If you found this case thought-provoking, hit the like button to show your support. Subscribe so you won't miss the next case. And share this video so more people can join the discussion. Every interaction from you is a huge motivation for me to keep bringing real and meaningful stories to the channel.